Recorded Books and RB Digital present Witch's Oath by Terry Goodkind. Narrated by John Skelly. Chapter 1. Kahlan's scream not only felt as if it ripped Richard's soul, it overwhelmed him with shock and terror. He couldn't understand or remember how he had come to be hanging in a room full of skinned corpses, also hanging by their wrists from the ceiling, but he realized it had to be a spell of some sort cast by the witch-man, Moravska Myshek. More than that, what had happened or how it had happened didn't really matter. All that mattered was what was, now. A quick glance to his left showed Shale, manacles around her wrists, likewise hanging on a chain attached to the ceiling and facing in the same direction he was. She appeared to be unconscious, and so could be of no help. The same distance to his right and facing in the same direction, toward all the hanging corpses, Kahlan struggled in panic at what was happening, at what was about to happen. The smell of all the dead bodies hanging in a grid pattern throughout the room was not only sickening, it was overpowering. Despite how much Kahlan thrashed around, making her wrists bleed all the more as the manacles cut into her flesh, Myshek had a firm grip on her flesh, with his fat thumb on the outside and 2 fingers in under the slit he had cut in the skin at the side of her throat so that he could begin skinning her alive. Richard clearly remembered Myshek saying he had spelled the room to block their gift. That had to be the reason she hadn't used her power on him. The thought of Moravska Myshek skinning Kahlan alive was more than Richard could take. He tried to reach his own gift, but when he did, it felt as if nothing was there. He simply felt empty. As long as Myshek's spell blocked their gift, his gift could be of no help. Directly across from Richard, Vika, as naked as Kahlan, hung helpless in manacles facing him. Despite the agony she was in from the gash Myshek had made in her abdomen to pull out a length of her intestines, and the aegil he had pushed into the open wound to increase the torture, she was clearly distraught watching Kahlan in the clutches of that evil man, a man who had once owned Vika. "Master," Vika called out in a weak voice, but a voice that Myshek heard. Annoyed, he turned a frown back over his shoulder at her, expecting to know why she would interrupt him. "Master," Vika managed again in a shaky voice. "What?" he shouted in anger at being interrupted before he could begin skinning Kahlan alive. "I'm trying to warn you. You've made a terrible mistake." The witchman's expression darkened, but curiosity caused him to take a step back from Kahlan. He wiped his bloody fingers on his filthy robes as he turned toward Vika. His blocky features were tight with displeasure at being called away from what he was so eager to do to Kahlan. Richard sagged in the manacles with relief that Vika had managed to stop him, if only for a moment, from what he had been about to do. Kahlan sagged as she watched, fearing his return. Myshek moved closer so that he could hear Vika's weak voice. "Warn me about what?" "Master, it is my duty to tell you that you have made a dangerous mistake." "What mistake?" When she failed to answer immediately, he pushed her aegil in a little deeper, making her gasp as her head tipped back in agony. "What mistake?" Richard could see the muscles in her legs tense. She clenched her teeth and held her breath for a moment, doing her best to endure the increase in agony caused by her aegil. Panting to get her breath, Vika finally brought her head back down. "The same mistake made by Darken Rahl. The same mistake made by Hannes Ark. The same mistake made by Emperor Sulichan. The same mistake made by so many others." Moravska Myshek, angry to be told he was making a mistake of any kind, stepped close and grabbed her aegil. He twisted it back and forth, sweeping it around inside the wound in her belly, making her cry out involuntarily as her eyes rolled up in her head with the pain, unable to endure it, yet unable to do anything to stop it. Her legs trembled, her feet shook. Richard ached at seeing how helpless she was. Myshek released the aegil and gripped one of the ropey braids of his beard between a dirty finger and thumb. One brow arched over a dark, angry eye. "What mistake would that be?" Her muscles stood out iron-hard from the torment of the aegil jutting from the open wound. She finally managed to gasp in enough air to speak. She stared at him with wet, sky-blue eyes. "The mistake of underestimating Lord Rahl." Myshek gestured irritably toward Richard. "Him? He is not worthy to be called Lord Rahl." "Call him what you will. Call him a mere woodsman, if you will, But it is my duty to warn you, Master, that you have made a fatal mistake. First, I underestimated him, and now I've made a fatal mistake? Her jaw trembling in pain, tears running down her cheeks, Vika nodded. Myshek's brow drew down over his cruel eyes. His arm lifted in a grand gesture. And what fatal mistake do you imagine I've made? Vika had to pause to swallow back her agony. You did not kill him when you had the chance. Richard Rahl does not make the mistake of trying to teach his enemies lessons. He does not keep them alive to lecture them and gloat. He simply kills them. Even though Vika was advising Myshek to kill him, Richard had faith that she was doing it for good reason. He realized it was a distraction to make Myshek stop before it was too late, and he started skinning Kahlan alive, even though it meant he would turn his formidable wrath on her. Richard feared for Vika, but was beyond grateful for her intervention. When he saw movement out of the corner of his eye, a quick glance revealed that Shale was at last awake. In that quick glance they both knew the despair of their situation. Myshek stared at the moored Sith briefly, as if considering her words, or possibly what more painful torture he could inflict, then huffed a brief chuckle. The snake-like braids of his beard swung around with him as he turned and stared at Richard for a moment. The greasy spikes of salt and pepper hair stood out against the pale greenish light from the glass spheres around the room. Myshek flicked a hand dismissively toward Richard as he looked back at Vika. I appreciate your loyalty in trying to warn me of danger, but you underestimate me. The famous and powerful Lord Rahl is quite helpless against me. No one escapes a witch's oath. He is gifted. I have seen him kill with his gift. Myshek's derisive smile distorted his coarse features. Gifted? I've blocked his gift. He thumped a fist against his own puffed-up chest. The same as I blocked your ability to use your Aegil against me, and I blocked the ability of the other Moored Sith, and I blocked this witch-woman's gift, and I blocked the Mother Confessor's power. No one but me can use their power in this room. So you see, you're quite wrong. He is hardly a danger to me now. His questionable powers won't help him. He is under the decree of a witch's oath. I am telling you, Master, you have made a fatal mistake. You arrogantly think to give him a show of your superiority, and in that arrogance, you have let your chance to kill him slip away. You will not get another chance. Myshek turned a look of raw hatred toward Richard. He slowly closed the distance from Vika, his glare fixed on Richard the whole time. He paused briefly to glance once over at Kahlan with lust for what was being delayed. She glared back with loathing and defiance. He smiled, pleased by that look. He finally came to a stop before Richard to look up at his helpless prize. Dangerous, are you? He planted his fists on his hips as he glared up at Richard with contempt. Then maybe I should take the advice of my loyal Moored Sith and... As hard as he could, Richard kicked the witchman in the face. His boot connected with bone. Richard didn't know if it was skull or jawbone, but Myshek's dead weight toppled back. He landed hard on his back and lay motionless, sprawled on the floor, his arms out to the side. He looked to be out cold. Her brow bunching with the effort, Vika flashed Richard a shaky smile through her pain. I bought you time. Now get out of here. Richard, Kahlan said. He looked where she was looking and saw the dark shapes of the Glee cautiously stepping out of the shadows of the hanging, skinless corpses. Like those corpses, Richard also hung helpless from manacles around his wrists. Those creatures would not wait for Myshek to come around and finally finish his work with Kahlan so they could have her. He knew they would take the opportunity to have what they had come for. The babies in Kahlan's womb. Chapter 2. Richard looked from the dark, glistening shapes of the cautious Glee back in among the shadows and hanging corpses to the unconscious form sprawled on the floor in front of him. Had he been able to brace against something solid when he kicked Myshek in the head, he might have been able to kill him. Hanging helpless, he had done the best he could. At the least, the big man was out cold for the moment. Richard knew he had only a small window of time before either Myshek came around or the Glee decided that this was their opportunity to take what they wanted. Richard pressed his knees together and lifted his legs out in front of him, then let them fall back. He did it several more times to get his whole body to start swinging back and forth, each time pumping his legs to get each arcing movement higher and higher. The chain grated in protest as the top link pivoted from the fat eye-bolt in the ceiling. Once he was swinging back and forth as much as he could, he threw his legs around to his right and kept contorting his body, changing that pendulum motion to rotation. As he swung his legs, he twisted his whole body around, swinging faster and faster, building momentum. Once all the slack was gone out of the chain as he continued to turn it with his body, the links couldn't resist the strain, and they started folding over on top of one another. The more he spun, the more it twisted the chain and the harder it was to keep the rotation going. As he spun the chain, it continually increased the pressure of the manacles on his wrists. They cut painfully into the flesh. He gripped the chain above the manacles to try to take some of the pressure off his wrists as he spun. Richard ignored the pain and kept swinging his legs around and around to force the chain to turn, hoping something would have to give way. As he did, the links continued to bunch and knot up. Suddenly, the pressure was too much, and the eye-bolt in the ceiling beam let out a snapping sound as the rusty threads finally broke their bond to the wood. With the threads broken free, the twisting force caused the bolt to begin to turn, unscrewing it from the wooden beam. The age and corrosion of the threads caused them to want to bind up and made it difficult to keep up the turning force. Despite the difficulty, Richard knew he couldn't stop, or he might never get it going again. He kept swinging his legs around and around to keep the eye-bolt unscrewing. He didn't dare rest for fear it would bind up and stick. Although Myshek still lay unconscious on the floor, Richard knew the man could come around at any moment. But right then, there was a bigger concern. With each rotation, he could see the Glee advancing across the room to get to Kahlan. He knew that with one powerful swipe of their claws, they could rip her open. By Kahlan's rapid breathing, he knew she was well aware of that imminent threat. All of a sudden, the turning eye-bolt broke free of the beam. Richard crashed to the floor. He quickly scrambled to his feet as several of the dark shapes were going for Kahlan. He grabbed the heavy chain in both hands and started swinging it around over his head. The first two Glee saw that he was now free and a threat, so they turned away from Kahlan toward him, eager to attack. Richard whipped the chain around and cracked it against the side of the head of one of them. The big eye-bolt at the end of the chain split its skull and sent the creature sprawling. Before the second could get to him, he swung the chain again. Because the second Glee raced in closer, he couldn't hit it in the head with the eye-bolt at the end of the chain. Instead, the chain caught the side of its neck. The heavy eye-bolt and the rest of the chain continued their flight, and the chain wrapped twice around the creature's neck. Richard immediately yanked the chain before the Glee could grab it or get its balance. The force of that pull twisted its head around, breaking its neck. Like the first one, the second fell dead before being able to vanish. Suddenly, there were more Glee coming for both him and Kahlan. He shortened his grip on the chain and stood far enough in front of her so that he wouldn't accidentally hit her as he continued swinging it around. The speed of the heavy chain was deadly. He took down the Glee as fast as they could come. "Shale," Kahlan yelled. "Do something to help him." "My gift doesn't work any more than yours does," the sorceress called back. "Don't you remember? Myshek blocked our power in this room." Richard knew there would be no help coming. It was all up to him to stop the threat, or Kahlan would die. They all would die. As masses of the Glee converged, and all came for him, he threw himself into the battle. He kept the chain spinning overhead fast as he could, whipping it against the creatures as soon as they were close enough. The eye-bolt at the end of the chain whistled as it swept through the air. Almost as fast as he downed one and another got close enough, he cracked the heavy eye-bolt against its skull. Most slowed and stayed back out of range. Others came for him, thinking they could duck under and evade the chain. He saw sharp white teeth snapping at his face. He caught the chain and doubled it over so he could swing it at them like a bat. That doubled the weight of each impact. As he was fighting off a number of Glee at the same time, one of them somehow suddenly got in close. Before it could claw him or bite his face, Richard threw a loop of the chain over its head and around its neck. He put his knee between the thing's shoulder blades and hauled back on the chain, letting out a yell with the effort until he felt and heard the windpipe crush in. Once it did, he kicked another of the tall, dark creatures back and immediately hit it in the head with the doubled-over chain. Richard lost himself in a world of seemingly endless, bloody battle. The rhythm of what he was doing soon became what he knew so well. It became the dance with death. He killed the creatures as fast as they could come at him. Those that were severely injured and were able vanished back into their world. The air in Richard's world was filled with howls and shrieks of the enraged creatures and of the wounded and dying. The floor was slick with blood and slime of the dead. Panting from the effort, Richard paused, looked around for more of the enemy, more targets. He suddenly realized that there were no more Glee still standing. A number of them lay dead, many sprawled over the top of others. The last of the howls and shrieks still seemed to echo in his head. He raced back to the witchman to strangle him with the chain before he could wake up. Myshek was gone. Chapter 3. Richard quickly looked around, hoping to be able to find and catch Myshek before he could get away, but he was nowhere to be seen. He gritted his teeth in rage that the witchman was no longer there on the floor. He had to kill the man before he could do anything else to them, before he could kill them first. "Did you see where he went?" he asked Kahlan and Shale. Both shook their heads. Before doing anything else, Richard rushed to Vika and yanked the Aegil from the gaping wound in her belly. She gasped. Holding the Aegil sent a jolt of pain up through his elbow, making him flinch. The blow of pain felt as if he had been hit in the back of the skull with an iron bar. It made his ears ring. He could not imagine the agony of having that weapon jammed inside an open wound. He tossed the Aegil on the floor, then touched her bloody, trembling leg as he looked up into her wet eyes. "Hold on, Vika." "Kill me," she pleaded. "Please, Lord Rahl. There is no hope for me now. Please, end it." "Just hold on," he said. "I'm going to help you. Trust me." Angry that he couldn't kill Myshek right then and there, he dragged the heavy chain attached to his manacles over to his sword and baldric, which lay under where he had been hanging. He had to grab the arm of one of the dark, slimy creatures lying over the bottom half of the scabbard and flip it over and off the weapon. He started to pull the sword out of the scabbard with his hands, but because they were chained closely together, he had to hold the scabbard between his boots to be able to draw the blade the rest of the way out. A familiar sensation stormed through him. He felt a fool. With the hilt held in both hands, it was with great relief that he felt the anger of the sword's magic join his to blossom into full rage. He immediately turned and swung the sword over the sorceress's head. Sparks flew as the blade shattered the iron chain and sent links flying. Shale dropped to the floor. "Hold your hands out," he told her. When she did, and she saw what he was about to do, and that she didn't have enough time to stop him, she gasped in fear as she turned her face away. The blade whistled through the air as it came down in an arc and hit the manacles with a glancing blow to the side of her wrists. It was enough to shatter the metal bands. Shards of hot steel skittered across the room, bouncing along the rough stone floor. Shale, somewhat surprised to still have her hands, was relieved to finally have the horrible devices off. She rubbed her bleeding wrists. "Hold Kahlan for me," he told the sorceress before she had the chance to thank him. Shale hugged her arms around Kahlan's legs to lift her weight a little. As soon as she did, Richard took a mighty swing at the chain, holding Kahlan up by her wrists. The iron links blew apart when hit with the singular blade, as if made of nothing more than clay. Hot, broken bits of chain sailed off through the air. Together, Shale and Richard lowered Kahlan down to stand on the floor. She held her hands out as she turned her bruised and bleeding face away so Richard could break the manacles from around her wrists. In relief, once they were off, she threw her arms around his neck. Richard returned the hug as best he could with both of his wrists still in manacles, and while doing so, let healing magic flow into her just long enough to ease her pain a little. The rest would have to wait. When he released her to turn and look for any threat, she sank down to the floor in a squat, elbows in tight at her sides, holding her head in her hands, comforting the painful wounds Myshek had inflicted, but also thankful for at least the little healing Richard had done. He put a hand on her shoulder, relieved that she was safe, at least for the moment. Without looking up, Kahlan reached up to grip his hand a moment. He understood the wordless meaning in that touch. Then, with Shale's help holding the Mord Sith's weight, Richard used his sword to break the chain holding her. As soon as he did, he immediately moved to help Shale carefully lower the Mord Sith to the floor. Shale and Kahlan both held Vika's arms as he shattered the manacles around her wrists. As the metal shards were still bouncing across the stone floor, a sound made him turn toward the back of the vast room. There, in the distance beyond the hanging skinless corpses, He saw the air come alive with masses of scribbles as hundreds of glee began to materialize, pouring out of nowhere into a mad dash toward them. They went around and among the hanging dead like a raging river, flooding around rocks on their way to Richard, Kahlan, Shale, and Vika. Without pause, still in the haze of rage from the sword, he turned to face the threat. Shale seized Kahlan in a protective hug, turning her own back to the danger. Still lost in the dance with death from fighting the last onslaught of glee, Richard acted without forethought. He went to his right knee. Holding the sword in both hands, he thrust it out toward the mass of dark shapes coming for them, teeth clacking, claws reaching as they screeched with murderous intent. From somewhere deep within, his war wizard birthright, his instinct, his raging need took over. That inheritance of power shot through his grip on the hilt, adding destructive force to the sword's rage. Light ignited from the tip of the sword. The room shook with a crack, as if the sword had been hit by lightning. The horizontal wedge of light that flared from the tip of his sword came out razor-thin and as sharp as his blade. The blindingly bright flash of flawless white illumination was so flat and thin as to be insubstantial, like a glowing pane of glass, yet at the same time it was pure menace. Everything that razor-thin flare of light touched was instantly severed. Corpses were sliced cleanly in half through bone and flesh as that flat blade of light effortlessly flared through them. The stiff bottom halves of the bodies thumped down to the floor. That same wedge of light cut through the glee like a hot knife through silk. There was no escaping the instantaneous, blindingly bright knife of light. Dark, severed legs collapsed. The top halves of slimy torsos, arms still flailing, tumbled across the floor, spilling their insides as they crashed down. Some of the glee clawed at the floor, trying to reach him. Since they were without legs and losing blood at a catastrophic rate, those efforts quickly died out as life left them. It all happened so fast that none of them managed to dive to the floor to evade the cutting light or vanish back into their home world. The Golden Goddess would never hear from the attack force. The instant that sheet of light ignited, everything before it was sliced in two. Almost as soon as it had ignited, the flat wedge of light extinguished. It had only lasted an instant, but that was all it had taken. Even though the light was gone, the room still reverberated with the crack of thunder it had created. Slowly, even that sound died out, to leave the room in ringing silence. What looked like hundreds of glee lay in a tangled, bleeding mass, a few arms still weakly clawing at the air. In another moment, even that residual muscle movement ceased, and the room went still as Richard, motionless on one knee, the manacles still around his wrists, with the chain attached, head bowed, held the sword out toward the vanquished threat. When he finally stood and turned back, he saw Shale standing stock still in wide-eyed shock. Kahlan, who only a moment before had been bracing with the sorceress for the swift death about to descend upon them, let out a sigh as she sagged in relief. Chapter 4. "Richard," Shale finally whispered into the haunting silence, "how in the world did you just do that? For that matter, what in the world did you just do?" Richard had no real answer. Truth be told, he was at a loss to understand what he had just done, much less explain it to her. He had simply acted out of instinct, a war wizard's instinct. "I ended the threat," he said in simple explanation, without trying to embellish with guesses about what he couldn't explain.
No. Well, yes, but what I mean is how could you possibly do that? That was clearly magic. Myshek blocked us from using our magic in this room. For that matter, how did your sword work? Your sword shouldn't work in here either. You shouldn't be able to use your gift in here."
Richard arched an eyebrow at her. "And you believe that?"
"Of course." Her brow tightened. "I could feel that I couldn't use my gift. It was blocked. How were you able to use yours?"
"He's not a wizard, but he used wizard's first rule." Her face twisted with bewilderment.
"Wizard's what?"
Richard wet his lips. "I don't think that a witch man, even as powerful as Myshek, could do something like block us from our gift. But you were afraid it was true, so you believed it. By believing it, in a way you made it true. You blocked your gift because in your own mind you believed a block was there. You expected to be blocked from your ability. I don't think Myshek really has the ability to do such a thing. At least not to us." To the Mord Sith, yes, because he was a trainer to Mord Sith, but not us. Sometimes a trick is the best magic.
But how did you know?
Richard showed her a crooked smile. A lesson my grandfather taught me. I just wish I hadn't been so slow to remember the lesson and realize what was really happening. If I had realized that lesson sooner, I would have been able to kill Myshek while still hanging from the chain. Without thinking, while I thought my gift was blocked, I expected the magic of the sword to work when I grabbed the hilt. When it did, I suddenly realized there couldn't be a block or I wouldn't be able to feel its power bonding with me. It was just a trick. I had been believing it because I was afraid it was true. Shale shook her head.
I wish I had realized it. I could have done something.
We all believed it because Myshek is a scary character. That's how such a trick works. It has to be convincing. Myshek is convincing, but he has limitations. Richard turned to Kahlan and held her bloody face gently in his hands. He kissed her forehead, relieved beyond words that she was safe, at least for the moment. He hated to see all that blood on her face. He briefly released a flow of subtractive magic as he held her head between his hands, making the blood on her face vanish and easing a little more of her pain. "Do you think you can hold on for a bit?" he whispered to her. "I need to help Vika." Kahlan nodded.
Myshek did no serious damage to me. Don't worry about me. You have to help Vika if you can.
As Richard turned, an astonished Shale hooked his arm. With her other hand, she waggled a finger at Kahlan.
How did you make the blood on her face vanish?
Subtractive magic. I told you. There's no block on our gift. He held both hands out, still in the manacles. Now show me I'm right by using your gift to get these off me. Giving him a dark look, she opened her mouth to question him, but then put her hands around the manacles. She closed her eyes as she concentrated on the task. Richard heard a snap as the lock on the metal bands broke. He twisted his hands, and to his great relief, the manacles with the chain still attached fell open and dropped to the floor. Thanks. See? Your gift was there all the time. He gestured toward the opening to the room off in the distance. Now keep a sharp lookout for Myshek. He's out there somewhere, and he's not going to so easily give up. I have to help Vika before he shows up again. The sorceress tightened her grip on his arm. Her eyes reflected the pain of sympathy and regret. She hesitated briefly, then leaned in close and spoke softly so that Vika wouldn't hear.
Lord Rahl, her wounds are too grievous to heal. Healing is part of my ability, something I've done my whole life. I know what is possible and what is not possible. There's nothing that can be done for her. You must believe me that I know what I'm talking about. She cannot be healed of a gut wound that serious, to say nothing of what else he did to that poor girl. But beyond that, even if it were within the scope of the possible, a complex healing takes many hours. An extremely complex healing can take days. Myshek is still down here, somewhere. He's not going to give up on a witch's oath. He will come back after us all. Do you think he won't kill Kahlan as well after he is finished with her?
Richard frowned at her. Are you saying we should run? That I should flee because of a witch's oath? He gestured around at the room full of skinned corpses, some of them now sliced in half by the magic he used to stop the glee. That I should abandon the people's palace to Myshek knowing full well what a monster he is and what he will do?
No.
She shook her head in exasperation.
No, it's not that. It's just that, with such grave danger to you and the Mother Confessor, and to your children, we don't have the luxury of that much time for a futile attempt to heal Vika. Nor can you afford the distraction of a protracted attempt that is doomed to fail in the end. The most you can do for Vika now is to grant her the mercy of a quick death. She has earned that much.
Richard bit back his anger at her words and instead said, "Let me handle this." Seeing the look in his eyes, Shale finally relented with a nod. He gently pulled away from her grasp on his arm. Kahlan then touched him with an expression of anguish over the grim situation. Richard looked at both of them briefly, at the pain he saw in their eyes. The resolve they saw in his eyes kept them both from saying anything. And then, something back in the darkness caught his eye. Past Kahlan and Shale, in the distance, in the dim greenish light, he saw a single glee just standing there watching. He remembered seeing a single glee before, after a previous battle when he killed a large group of them. He stared at the dark shape. It stared back. and then it did the oddest thing. Without moving, it turned its hands over and spread the 3 claws of each hand and just stood there like that for a moment. He saw then that the Glee's hands were webbed between each claw. It wasn't at all an aggressive posture. If he didn't know better, he would say it was acknowledgement of Richard and what he had just done. As soon as the Glee knew they had made eye contact, and it had shown him its webbed hands, the air turned to scribbles as it vanished back into its own world. Richard wondered if it could possibly be the same one he had seen before, the same lone Glee, or if it was a scout of some sort, come to see what had happened and report back to the Golden Goddess. He also wondered why the Glee would have webbed claws, if they were predators. Whatever its purpose, Richard didn't have time to consider it any longer. He had much more important things to tend to. His gaze refocused on the 2 women in front of him. I have to help Vika. Chapter 5. The naked Mord Sith lay in a pool of her own blood on the rough, cold stone floor below where she had been hanging. Bits of broken chain were scattered across the floor. Her single braid was soaked red from that blood. Her red leather outfit lay on the far side of her. Vika's pale face was a landscape of bruises, open wounds, and strings of blood from a beating. Richard could see that both of her cheekbones had been broken from the blows. One of the bone fragments stuck out through the skin. He could hardly contain his rage at what the witch-man had done to her. He could also hardly believe that she was still alive. He knew, though, that if he didn't do something soon, she wouldn't be alive for long. He reminded himself that the time would come, but now was not the moment to focus on his anger at Moravaska Myshek. Now it was about Vika, and what he hoped to be able to do. She was trembling ever so slightly. Her eyes were closed as she struggled against the crushing weight of pain. A glistening, bloody mass of her intestines lay up against her side, still attached by a knotted length of gut coming out of the gaping wound in her abdomen. He had a hard time believing that she wasn't crying in agony. During their training, Mord Sith were kept on the cusp of death for days on end. Richard knew that such twisted training made them more than merely tough. They all knew death well. They all danced with death in their own, private way. It was that training, he thought, and only that training, that made her able to endure it, and probably was keeping her alive. Vika's eyes opened as Richard knelt down close beside her. "You did good, Lord Rawl. I knew you would think of something if I could just buy you a little time." The inside of her lips had been gashed open on her teeth when Myshek had struck her with his fists. He could see how much it hurt her to speak, despite doing her best not to let it show. "I hope you don't think I was really urging him to kill you." "No," he quietly reassured her as he put a hand gently on her shoulder. "No, I knew what you were doing." She let out a breath in relief. Richard smiled down at her through the pain of empathy at seeing her in such a condition. He gently brushed a strand of blonde hair back from her eyes as she gazed up at him. "You are the one who did good, Vika. It was all your doing. I couldn't have done it without you. You saved Kahlan and me, and our children." "It was my great honor," she said. "I'm afraid that it is my time now. I know the cusp of the world of the dead well enough. I have returned from that place more times than anyone has a right to. I am looking out at you now from the brink of that dark place. The world of the dead calls to me. My time has come to go beyond the veil. Thank you for rescuing me from Hannes Ark, and for allowing me to serve you." Richard shook his head. "It's not your time, Vika. Don't even think that. You must live. I need you." She rolled her head from side to side. "It is too late for me now. I know that. Please don't try to soothe me with the false kindness of a lie. I know better. I am the seeker of truth. It is no lie. I wouldn't do that to you. If I thought it was too late for you, I would tell you so." She smiled the littlest bit. "Not even you can heal me or hold back the world of the dead. But I would be eternally grateful if you would spare me any more suffering in this life and send me swiftly on to the next. Vika, please, Lord Rawl, end it. I am ashamed to admit that I am not strong enough to endure this any longer, and I don't have the strength to end it myself. I hate for you to see me so weak. Please, grant me the mercy of a quick death." Richard swallowed back his anguish. It was hard for him to see her beg for death. "I asked you to trust me. You must do that now." I am the Lord Rahl. We are bonded in an oath, you to me and me to you. Your life while in this world is in my hands, and just as it is your duty to serve and protect me, my duty is to protect you. More than that, I need you. You have given me your oath of loyalty. Remember that oath now, and put your trust in me. You must hold on for me. Before she could object, Richard laid a hand gently on her brow. He closed his eyes and bowed his head, letting his power flow into her. Vika gasped as she felt the hot rush of it. He didn't try to heal her or even relieve her pain. He knew that would be futile right then. For the moment, he could only give her strength to help her endure her injuries and hold on until he could do more to try to save her. When he opened his eyes and lifted his head, he was looking into her intense blue eyes. He smiled at the look in those eyes. There's the Mord Sith I know. He touched a finger to her lips before she could speak. My strength is your strength. Now, hold on for me. A tear ran from the corner of her eye as she nodded. Richard rushed to his feet. He might have given her some added strength, but he knew he didn't have much time. Strength alone would not keep her alive. A short distance away, Shale, keeping a watchful eye on him, was just finishing helping Kahlan get her clothes back on. Kahlan's eye was still bluish-black and swollen shut. Her wrists oozed blood, as did Shale's wrists, as did his own. Watch for Myshek, he told them both. He is still down here somewhere. We're going to need some time without being interrupted. Shale eyed him suspiciously. Time for what? Kahlan was just finishing buttoning her shirt. When Richard didn't answer, she offered her own answer. Time for a crazy idea, I suspect. Shale looked to Richard and then back at Kahlan. What crazy idea? I can't begin to imagine. Kahlan, I need you to do something. With an arm around her shoulders, Richard pulled her closer. He didn't have time for questions. I know you are hurting, and you need to be healed. So do Shale's wrists. We will take care of that, I promise. But right now, stay here with Vika. I don't want her to be alone. Hold her hand. Just be with her until I get back. Where are you going? To get the others. Shale gestured off toward where the rest of the Mord Sith knelt at the opening to the kill room. Myshek blocked them. Do you believe it is the same kind of trick of magic that he did with us? Richard sighed as he looked off among the hanging corpses toward the opening to the room. In the distance, between some of the skinned bodies, he could just see the red leather outfits of a few of the kneeling Mord Sith. No. He was a trainer of Mord Sith. I don't know exactly how such things worked, but as a trainer he would possess very real power over them. I'm sure Myshek really was able to block them off from everything. Then what are you going to do? The sorceress asked. I'm going to pull them out from beyond that block. Now wait here with Kahlan, please, and stay on guard. Myshek is out there somewhere, and sooner or later he is going to come after us. I'm worried he might slip back in here and surprise us. When you see him, are you going to scythe him down with light from your sword like you did to the Glee? The sorceress asked expectantly. That would certainly be effective. Richard's mouth twisted with frustration. I would if I could, but I don't actually know how I did it. I simply reacted. In that instance of desperation, I can only assume my war wizard heritage took over, assessed the nature of the threat, what tools I had at hand, and what powers could be brought to bear, then it did what that instinctual part of my ability concluded would be the most effective response. I don't know that for certain, but it seems the most logical guess. I do know it wasn't a conscious act. Shale briefly considered his words. She finally gave him a serious look. Then what are you going to do if you encounter the Witchman? He has powerful magic. Richard gazed back with an equally serious look. I guess I'll have to take care of him the old-fashioned way. The old-fashioned way? What's that? Richard arched an eyebrow. I'll just have to go all emotional on him. Shale's mouth twisted with displeasure as she looked over at Kahlan. You were right. A crazy idea. Chapter 6. Just before he reached the broad opening back out to the corridor, Richard paused, sword in hand, to carefully lean out and look in both directions. He could feel the word truth, formed by the gold and silver wire-wound hilt pressing into his palms. Blood ran down from the painful, throbbing wounds on his wrists, onto the hilt of the sword, and then down the blade to drip from the tip. His blood always made the sword's magic lust to meet the enemy. He had often used his blood to give the sword even more motivation. Looking out, he didn't see any sign of the witchman. He worried how Myshik might be able to hide himself in plain sight. After all, the first time Richard had seen him, he had seemed to materialize out of smoke. Fortunately, Richard didn't see any smoke either, but he had no way of knowing what other powers Myshik might be able to use to hide himself. Richard had kicked the man in the head pretty hard, but he didn't know exactly where his boot had connected or how much damage it had done. All he knew was that he had used all his strength to do it. With the way it had knocked the man out cold, it had to have done some damage, but Richard didn't know if it was enough. Myshek was most likely hiding somewhere, nursing his injuries. Richard knew nothing about witchmen and wondered if it was possible for him to heal himself. Unless the kick had done serious damage, it wouldn't keep him down. Someone that filled with hate and a lust for power wasn't about to let his prey slip away, so Richard knew it wouldn't be long before the witchman came out of nowhere to attack them. When he did, Richard knew the man would be out for blood. But until then, he had at least a small window of opportunity to try to save Vika. The other 5 Mord Sith were still kneeling in a line in the broad opening, hands held out, their aegil still attached by the fine gold chains around their wrists, resting across their upturned palms. They all stared blankly ahead. Richard knew that despite their lifeless appearance, they would all feel the pain of those aegil. Richard didn't believe it had been a trick that put the Mord Sith into such a state of oblivion. This was a result of Myshek's ability both as a witchman and as a trainer of Mord Sith. Richard didn't know what those abilities entailed or how he had come by them, but he knew they were very real. It was just one more cause for concern. While young women were chosen for their innocence and compassion, he suspected that trainers of future Mord Sith were chosen for their obsession with cruelty. All he knew for sure was that he had to get the 5 Mord Sith back from that lost place before he tried to heal Vika, and he needed to hurry. Vika couldn't last much longer. He put his hand on the red leather on Berdine's shoulder. She didn't respond. She had belonged to Myshek once, so his control over her would be the strongest. Through his hand on her shoulder, Richard could feel the painful hum of power coursing through her from her aegil. That power was fueled by their bond to the Lord Rahl, not Myshek, and therein lay the source of his hope. He could also sense, through that connection, that she was in pain. That pain was likely worsened by the block. It saddened him, too, to feel her hopelessness. Richard squatted down, keeping his hand in contact with her shoulder. He knew how to heal with his gift. He had, a number of times, connected to people who were injured or sick, and had let his ability flow into them. He began to open that same mental gateway deep within himself. "I am here with you, Berdine," he said into her ear. "As Mord Sith, your loyalty and bond are to me as the Lord Rahl for as long as you wish to serve me. No other may claim dominion or authority over you. No one. Not now, not ever. Moravaska Myshek is an enemy of the Daharan Empire, and I am the leader of that empire. I now dissolve any block he placed in you, and place instead the protection of my gift to block him from ever again using his power over you." Richard removed the rest of his own internal restraints to let the full healing force of his power rush into her, so she would not only hear him, but feel him, feel his gift, feel his bond to her and hers to him, and be able to feel the raw pain of the block the witchman had left in her mind melt away into nothingness. He stood then and held the point of the sword over her upturned hands to let some of his blood drip from the tip of the blade onto her palms. "With my bond and blood oath, I reclaim you from that witch." Berdine gasped. Her head jerked up. Her eyes came open. She blinked a moment and then shook her head as if gathering her senses, trying to understand where she was. Finally, she stared at the blood on her palms and then looked up at Richard. "Lord Rahl." When Richard smiled, she suddenly shot to her feet and threw her arms around him in relief. "You saved me. You came for me and you saved me. I knew you would." Richard patted her back and then pushed away. "We don't have much time. I need to get the others back as well." He went to each Mord Sith in turn and repeated the procedure until all 5 of them were jolted out from behind that block Myshek had put in their minds. None of the others hugged him the way Berdine had, but they were all clearly thankful that he had come for them and succeeded in breaking the witchman's hold over them.
Where is Myshek? Rika asked as she stood and looked both ways down the corridor.
I don't know, Richard said. We are going to need to hunt him down, but first I have to help Vika.
You found her, then? Nida asked, expectantly.
Richard nodded. I'm afraid that the news is not good, though. He hurt her bad. Richard hurriedly led them back through the forest of nearly skinless corpses. The moored Sith all looked about dispassionately, taking in the exposed red muscles, white ligaments, and faces frozen in horror and agony. They were all familiar with Myshek's work. When they spotted Vika, though, they were clearly angry.
Myshek did this to her? Cassia asked in a whisper as she leaned in close.
Richard nodded. We need to help her. Nida turned an incredulous look back over her shoulder at him. Help her? A look of sudden understanding came over her. She lowered her voice.
Oh, I see now what you mean. Lord Rahl, would you rather one of us do it, then? She is a sister of the Aegil, after all.
Richard cocked his head. Do what? Nida looked clearly uncomfortable.
You know, end it. A quick twist of my Aegil and her suffering will be forever over.
Richard held out his hands, forestalling any such idea. No, you don't understand. We have to heal her. Chapter 7. The 5 moored Sith shared a look, but didn't say anything. They all knew that these kinds of injuries were well beyond healing. Richard hoped to prove that belief wrong. Kahlan was kneeling beside Vika, with Shale on the other side. Each was holding a hand of the gravely wounded moored Sith. We need to get on with the healing, Richard told them. He looked around to make sure all of them were paying attention. We have to hurry. Here's what we are going to do. Shale looked up at him.
We?
Richard nodded as he gestured for all of the moored Sith to gather around closer to Vika, so he would only have to explain it once. Myshek is down here somewhere, he said, looking to each of their faces in turn. He could show up at any moment, so we can only do this if we're quick. Shale clearly looked confused.
Healing grievous wounds, if it was still within the realm of possibility, and if it could be done at all, would take a day at least, likely many days for all I know.
You're right, Richard said. We don't have that kind of time. Neither does Vika. So trying the conventional way of healing that you know so well is simply not an option. Not only that, but like you, I seriously doubt that it would even work. Whatever we do must be done quickly. Kahlan looked puzzled as to what he could be talking about. Shale was looking at him as if he had lost his mind.
Quickly, the sorceress repeated. You intend to heal her quickly? Of course. She looked up at the ceiling as if speaking to an audience in a gallery. That makes sense.
Ignoring Shale's remark, Richard wiped a hand across his mouth as he turned around, staring off in the other direction for a moment, trying to think how he could explain it to them without causing them to panic. He turned back. I think I have a way that we can heal her if we all do it together. All 9 of us together.
Lord Rahl, Verdine said as she gestured at her sisters of the Aegil to each side of her. We don't know anything about healing. I think most of us have been healed at one time or another, but we can't heal anyone. We can't use magic, other than that which the Lord Rahl gives us through our bond in order to use the power of our Aegil and all that involves.
Richard knew quite well how much moored Sith hated anything to do with magic. Yes, you can, he insisted, but in a unique way. I'm afraid that it will be dangerous, though. Dangerous to all of us. Still, I think it has a chance to be successful.
You think?
Shale held up a hand to stop him right there.
First of all, I can't imagine what you are talking about, but more importantly, you and the Mother Confessor have a responsibility to the 2 children of Dahara she is carrying. Our job is to protect her from danger, not put her in it.
This is to protect her, Richard insisted. You need to listen to me. You all need to listen to me. You need to see the bigger picture, not just this one moment, this one risk. It's important that Vika live because she is vital to our survival. There are 9 of us. If we lose Vika, then there are only 8.
Kahlan squinted. Does this have something to do with the law of 9s?
Richard gave her a firm nod. Yes.
The law of what? Shale asked. I think you said something about that before.
I did. Richard pointed a finger up at the palace above them. In one of the highly restricted libraries up in the People's Palace, there is a book that deals with the power of numbers as it relates to the use of the gift. It says that there are various cardinal numbers, some of them very powerful in how they affect magic. 9, in many ways, is the most important number. In the right circumstances, it can alter and increase the power of magic. In some cases, it can even invoke some powers of magic. In rare cases, there are even powers of magic that can be brought about in no other way. The number 3 is associated as an element of the number 9, and so also important. It's part of how we use magic. For example, the devotion is repeated 3 times. There's a reason for that. Those 3 repetitions reinforce the magic in the bond itself because they invoke the law of 9s. Berdine looked puzzled. But 3 isn't 9. But there are 3 devotions spoken, 3 times a day. 3 threes are 9. See what I mean? 3 is a constituent component of 9. It adds power to an already powerful number. So, you think that because there are 9 of us, our power is greater than any one of us alone? Kahlan asked. Among other things, Richard said, relieved that she at least grasped what he was talking about. What other things? She asked. Richard gestured overhead. We are in the People's Palace, drawn in the shape of a spell form to give the Lord Rahl more power. On top of that, we are also inside a complication, designed to make the Lord Rahl's power, aided by that spell form, more effective. The Law of 9s makes a 3rd element. All 3 of these things, the Law of 9s, the Palace spell, and the complication, give me the best chance to save Vika. I have to take this opportunity while I have all those elements on my side. Kahlan leveled a look at him. We also have things that work against us. Besides Vika's wounds being grave, Myshek is down here somewhere. He could show up and attack us at any moment. And then there are the Glee. Richard nodded. I didn't say it would be easy, or that there aren't risks. He leaned closer to her. But if we lose Vika, we lose a powerful element of protection for you and the babies in getting us to the protection of the Wizard's Keep. To preserve that power of 9, we need Vika with us. We can't begin to imagine right now how and when we might desperately need that added bit of help afforded by the Law of 9s. As small as that bit of magic may be, it could be enough to make the difference when it matters most. Because of the Law of 9s, the 9 of us together have a kind of cumulative ability that none of us alone would have. Neither Shale nor I, by ourselves, have the ability to do a healing of injuries as life-threatening as the ones Vika has. Shale was giving him a look, part skepticism and part analytical interest. So, because of this Law of 9s, you think all of us together can somehow heal her? In a way, yes. In a way? Shale folded her arms. How? We need to all join hands. Shale, you will be holding Vika's right hand as you were a moment ago. Then all the Mord Sith will line up around Vika, all holding hands. Kahlan will be at the end of them. Then me. I will be holding Vika's left hand with my right, in that way linking us all together. When we are joined in that ring, I believe the Law of 9s will give me what I need to help me heal her. Shale still had her arms folded as she glowered at him from under her brow. And how long do you think this will take? By her tone, she was clearly growing even more suspicious of exactly what it was he intended to do. From our side, it will be almost instantaneous. That's the advantage of what I plan to do. Kahlan leaned in, her suspicion now exceeding Shale's. From our side? What exactly are you saying? Richard didn't want to fool any of them, but at the same time he needed to tell them at least part of what he intended. Once we are linked, I will use all our combined gifts to stay connected to Vika in the underworld. Jaws dropped. Kahlan reached out and gripped his arm. What? It's the only way. Shale's arms had come unfolded as she leaned in along with Kahlan. The only way to do what? Die with her? Well, I should hope not, Richard said, offering a smile to her surprise. That clearly wasn't what any of them expected to hear. You have to trust me on this. It's the only way to have the time we need to do this. Only Kahlan understood. Of course. But Richard... Of course what? Shale interrupted. Kahlan cast a worried look at the sorceress. The underworld is eternal. There is no such thing as time in an eternal world, because with no beginning and no end, there is no way to measure it or determine how much time has passed. What might be an instant here could be days or even centuries in the underworld. Richard could see that Shale was about to unleash 100 questions and 1,000 objections. He didn't want to hear any of it. I intend to save Vika, the same as I would save any of you. I view this as necessary to help us get Kahlan and these children of Dahara to the safety of the keep. It needs to be done. We are wasting time. In the underworld, he would have an eternity of time, among other things. I want everyone to kneel down around Vika in a circle, he told them. Shale, you take her right hand. The rest of you join hands like I explained. Kahlan, you take my hand.
Lord Rawl, Vika said in a weak voice as they all knelt around her, I don't want to endanger any of you. Please, don't.
It endangers us more if we lose you. As the Lord Rawl, I judge that this is what we must do. Now, put your trust in me. Richard gestured to the others. Everyone, join hands. Chapter 8. Richard picked up Vika's Aegil, which he had pulled from her gut wound earlier and had thrown on the floor. Vika, I want you to hold this in your teeth. I gave you some of my strength before. Do you think you can do that? I need you back at that place. Knowing that he meant that place on the cusp between worlds, she nodded. In a way, the pain of an Aegil was an insane kind of familiar comfort to a moored Sith. Richard had already tensed the muscles of his abdomen to help him endure the pain of holding the Aegil. Unlike the moored Sith, he found no comfort in such pain. When he held it out in front of her, she pulled her lips back and clamped her teeth down on it. Her pupils dilated as the wall of pain hit her, and her jaws clenched tighter. He didn't need to tell her to bite down. Once he saw that she had, he carefully picked up the small pile of her intestines coiled on the floor beside her. He did his best to carefully wipe off any specks of dirt or crumbled rock. Once he had inspected them to see that they didn't have any foreign matter stuck to them, he stretched out and pushed the tips of his fingers into the wound in order to spread open the sides to give him room to guide the warm mass back inside her abdomen. Her eyes wide, Vika stared at the ceiling as she trembled. Each breath was a ragged pull. Then she would tighten her muscles and bear down again until she needed another breath. All right, that's the worst of it, he told her. She nodded without looking over at him. It didn't look like it had helped with the pain. Her face had gone a bloodless white, telling him that, if anything, the pain was worse. He put a bloody hand on her shoulder. Hold on, Vika, it won't be long. You're already on the cusp. The pain of the Aegil will help you take that final step through the veil. I will be holding your hand. I will be here, but also with you, and watching over you when you cross over. The last part wasn't exactly true, but he needed to say it for those listening, especially Kahlan. There was no time for questions he dare not answer honestly. When you get to that place beyond, to that world, it will be tempting to let yourself go into that forever world, he told her. Believe me, I know. You will find comfort there in being free of the pain, free of misery, fear, and worry, free of everything. You will want to let yourself drift away into that eternal world where struggles of life are a thing of the past and you can be at peace. If it's all too much for you, you have my permission to accept that world. He didn't want her to make that choice, but he wanted to give her a choice to be better able to endure what she was about to face. He knew that by having the option of a way out, it sometimes helped endure a hard choice. But I need you, Vika. Kahlan needs you. Our children need you. Dahara needs you. So I hope you will have the strength to let me heal you while your spirit is there, and then return to us. She finally looked over into his eyes and nodded. He could see her doing her best to fight the pain of both her injuries and the Aegil she held clamped in her teeth. This is insanity, Shale said in a low voice. Kahlan looked like she might agree, but she didn't say so. Richard knew that despite her well-founded fear, Kahlan was doing her best to put her trust in his judgment that what he was doing was necessary to help get their unborn children to safety. He fervently hoped that her trust was warranted. Richard looked up at the sorceress on the other side of Vika. You may be right. I do know that without you to make up 9 of us, this will likely fail. But just as I'm not forcing Vika to do this, I'm not forcing you to be a part of it either. If you can't commit to helping me, to helping us all, and especially to helping Vika, then that must be your choice. Either way, I intend to attempt it, with or without you. But without you, without the law of nines,